And of course, these are analytically different windows on the same process. So I was trying to sort of integrate these two to show how differentiation by sector would work in a situation of declining rate of profit. And so what I'm also showing here is how for a country which has got greater capacity to increase its rate of surplus value, it can offset the decline in the rate of profit. And I posed these discussion points, which are still valid, but perhaps I can just highlight them more clearly now. When we talk about the total social capital, are we talking about one country or the entire mode of production? It is definitely the case that in volume 3, as the text has come down to us, Marx was talking about one country. So the question of how that translates to an entire mode of production is still a question. He did say it was relatively unproblematic in volume 3. Why is country B's rate of profit higher than country A's? Well, I have answered that because it's able to exploit more workers at a higher rate of surplus value. Now, all of this is meant to suggest an actual historical process taking place, which is basically toward the end of the 19th century. Think of country A as, I don't know, say Germany. Think of country B, say, for example, as England. Okay, so country B is able to take more advantage of exploiting workers at a higher rate of surplus value. And there's two ways that country A can catch up, if you like, with country B. The first is it too can have more colonies and therefore exploit a wider number of workers to a greater degree. And if that fails, it may have to go to war with country B in order to capture some of its colonies. So the tendency towards war within an imperialist system is very much a sort of a Leninist type explanation, is to re-divide what an already colonized world. Okay. Now, the other issue that sort of arises here is what about different degrees of equalization? I mean, is it necessary that the rate of profit is the same within any given country in all different sectors? And of course, this is a very valid discussion, I think, because if you look at chapter 10 of volume 3, as distinct from chapter 9, chapter 9 sort of gives an idealized situation of equalized rates of profits across sectors. And chapter 10 kind of says, well, there's lots of reasons why that might not happen. So there can be a degree of partial equalization, or there can be things that stop the equalization from taking place. One of those is that if one of the sectors is in agriculture, then there could be a capturing of the extra profits in agriculture in the form of rent, so that the surplus labor is retained in that sector by the landowning class. So rent is, if you like, a type of surplus profit. And of course, once the rent is captured by the landowning class, then the surplus value is no longer part of the overall equalization of the rate of profit. And the rate of profit for industrial capital would fall. There are other forms of surplus profit, and I think that the best one way to consider this extension of sectors into regions so that you get higher degrees of exploitation is that this is the way that capital can generate another form of surplus profit. And the category of surplus value underlying all of this is the category of super exploitation, because what we're talking about is rates of exploitation that are higher, not because of a technical change in, if you like, in the forces of production, but because of a change in the relations of production. That is to say, relations to production, capitalist social relations have become more oppressive. The workers are more preyed upon by capital. So that's my sort of summary and slight better, I hope, articulation of what I was saying last time. Now I want to outline what I'm going to be saying this time. And what I'm going for is, so far, I think I've been adding layers of complication to Marx's solution, or if you like, adding back in variables which I think are implicit in the way he sets up the problem. Now, the ambition of this one is slightly different, right? Which is, I actually want to go back to basics in a way within the transformation problem. What essentially is being transformed into what? And when you strip it down, you can see that behind all these other variables, organic composition, turnover, rate of surplus value, etc., we go back to the fundamental contradiction, which is between capital and labor, and in particular, the capital advanced in a sector in its totality and the living labor supplied by the working class in a given sector in its totality. And the transformation which is taking place, I'm going to try and explain, I think, is a modification not only of Marx's transformation problem, but his transformation problem itself is a modification of what we understand from volume 1 is the expression of value. In volume 1, value is expressed as an exchange value. That is to say, labor time has to be expressed as an amount of money. And I think that in effect, what Marx is doing is rewriting how value is expressed as exchange value. He doesn't quite fully bring this out, but I think it's a very strong implication of what he's doing. And the other thing that I would add is this question of value created versus value added, which I'll come on to. So if you like, I'm going back to chapter 9 once again, and it's a question of how deep we go into the internal relations behind the surface appearances, how much we include the conflict between labor and capital, which, if you remember, I was saying right at the very beginning of volume 3, this is the principal contradiction which Marx is actually looking at how it unfolds. And we're also looking very much at this in terms of the actualized appearance and the only and necessary way that labor actually appears in a capitalist system. Okay, and then finally we come on to value added, as I've mentioned. All right, another little analogy. Again, it could cause more confusion than it illuminates, but do bear with me. This is a picture of the different planets that we do know about. Earth is in there amongst them. And I just want to use this to illustrate a point and apply it in the context of commodities. And the point is the idea of commensurability. Now, if you look at this picture, you can see they're all spheres, and they will all have a mass. They'll have a volume and they'll have a density. And the fact that they're spheres and have a mass means that they're commensurable. We can actually compare one with another in those terms. And if they weren't commensurable, we couldn't compare them. It's quite hard to compare a planet with a donkey because they're not very commensurable. Now, they don't have an equal mass, so making them commensurable allows us to ask the question of their equivalence. Are they equivalent or aren't they? But we can't actually do that comparison unless they are actually comparable, if that makes sense. Now, the way this picture, as a side point, the way this picture is presented is these are just like a series of atoms. These are atomic planets. They're spheres and not yet planets. Now, if we think of planets, they really conceived of and exist as not just spheres, but as planets in motion. They're all linked together in a system, which is the solar system. So basically, let's see how far we get with this analogy in the next slide. So commensurability comes before equivalence, but what is it that's being commensurate? What quality? And this applies to commodities, okay? So what is it that we're comparing when we look at a commodity? Now, in volume 1, what Marx is comparing when he looks at the commodity is the fact that they are products of labor. So we can compare different commodities in a system of commodities because they all are products of elements of social labor. abstract labor is a sort of like that commonality across all of the commodities. But in a capitalist system, it's not just that commodities are the products of labor. Commodities in a capitalist system are also, and in a different sense, products of capital. So how is